Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Light Up Podcast. Thank you to my listeners who have followed my channel on Spotify and subscribed to my channel on YouTube. Thank you to each of you who are listening from across the world to join me on a journey of discovery through time and human civilizations, where we uncover the stories that have shaped the world many of us know today. Keep in mind that I intentionally speak slowly so that you can hear the words. And producing my last episode was a bit challenging since I was learning how to put all the pieces I created for this together. But that's for another episode. So, have fun, take notes, pause, and listen as many times as you need. I hope you will gain the confidence to start using new words you learn. So, with that, let's continue with the series. Today, we will peel back the layers of one of the world's most beloved fruits, the tomato. Yes, you heard right. Tomato, or some may pronounce it as tomato. However you pronounce it, we all know of it. I'm your host, Alice, and today we're embarking on a flavorful journey through the history, economy, politics, language, and culture surrounding this versatile and vibrant fruit. For those of you who do not know and have asked me to explain the difference between a fruit and a vegetable, well, tomatoes are often called vegetables instead of fruits because they are used in savory dishes typical of vegetables. This culinary classification is more common than the botanical fact that tomatoes are actually fruits. Additionally, a historical legal decision in the United States also classified tomatoes as vegetables for tariff purposes, further cementing this common usage. So let's start with the history of tomatoes. Tomatoes are native to Western South America and were introduced to the Europeans during their conquest of the Aztec Empire in what is now Mexico. So, tomatoes come from the New World, which refers to the continents of North and South America, since these regions were considered new to Europeans at the time of their discovery in the 15th and early 16th centuries. The history of the tomato plant is a tale of cultivation and transformation that spans thousands of years from the Andes region of South America in what is now Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Chile, where wild tomatoes grew and still continue to grow even today. It is thought that the first cultivated tomato was small and yellow. These early tomatoes resembled cherry tomatoes rather than the larger varieties we are familiar with today. And it was during that time period that the cultivation of tomatoes expanded to what is now modern Mexico for domestic cultivation, which emphasizes how much these ancient peoples appreciated the tomato's rich flavor since they used it in their cuisine long before it reached other parts of the world. But it was not until explorers from the Old World, which refers to the continents of Europe, Asia, and Africa to include 146 countries we know today, since these regions were known to ancient civilizations and have a long history of human habitation and cultural development. And It was not until the age of exploration, when Spanish conquistadors from the Old World encountered the inhabitants of the New World in the 16th century, that tomatoes made their way to Europe. See, the discovery of the New World by European explorers such as Christopher Columbus marked a significant turning point in world history, leading to the Columbian Exchange, which was a period of extensive cultural, biological, and ecological exchange between the Old World and the New World. The legacy of Columbus's voyages is complex, reflecting a significant historical event with far-reaching consequences, both beneficial and detrimental. It is important to acknowledge the negative aspects, specifically the destruction of indigenous civilizations and the unprecedented loss of lives that was caused by this encounter through both war and disease. These Spanish conquistadors, returning from their conquests in the New World, brought with them treasures beyond compare, including the vibrant red fruit known as the tomato. However, it was not all smooth sailing for our little red friend, since in the 18th century Europe, tomatoes were considered downright scandalous. The early European reaction to tomatoes was one of suspicion and even fear, making the tomato's journey to fame full of challenges. See, when the tomato was first introduced to Europe from the Americas, the plant was classified as a member of the nightshade family of plants, which contains about 2,700 species of both edible and poisonous groups of plants. And, considering the historical, linguistic, and cultural factors during these earlier periods, there was a lot of confusion and miscommunication about their nature. So what did people think about them? Well, when tomatoes were first brought to Europe, especially in regions that speak the Romance languages, its name was often associated with the word for apple, since it looked like an apple. But there was also a belief that tomatoes had aphrodisiac properties due to their exotic origins, their bright, sensuous color, and people's general belief at the time to attribute exotic foods with special powers. So, this obviously led to tomatoes being nicknamed love apples. Talk about a saucy reputation! During the late 1500s, tomato plants were cultivated throughout Europe primarily as an ornamental plant, which means that back then, people throughout Europe grew tomato plants in their gardens for its aesthetic beauty and decorative purposes rather than for practical or utilitarian reasons such as food or medicine. Now, why is that, you may ask? Well, back then, some people believed them to be poisonous due to their resemblance to the deadly nightshade plant. Yes, tomatoes were considered deadly in some regions and were even called poison apples. If you're wondering why, it's mainly because most Europeans thought that the ruling elites who were used to having both social and economic prestige as well as political power got sick and died after eating them. But the truth was that wealthy Europeans used plates made of pewter, which comprised of a malleable metal alloy made from tin, antimony, copper, bismuth, which contained a high content of lead, and sometimes silver. So because of the high acidity of tomatoes, when the fruit was placed on pewter plates, the tomato would leach lead from the plate, which resulted in many deaths from lead poisoning. This resulted in the tomato being blamed as the reason for death, since no one in the late 1500s made the connection between the plate and the toxic lead poison at the time. So see, it was not until the tomato plant spread to Italy by the mid-1500s that tomatoes became incorporated into the regional cuisine. Meaning that even though tomatoes arrived in Europe in the early 16th century, it took over a century, which is more than a period of 100 years, for tomatoes to be embraced as a culinary ingredient in Italy. Their integration into Italian cuisine was a gradual process, influenced by cultural, botanical, and culinary factors. So much so that in the 19th century, tomatoes became synonymous with Italian cooking, a status they still enjoy today. It was only then that tomatoes began being featured in Italian recipes, particularly in the cuisine of southern Italy. In fact, the first known Italian recipe using tomatoes dates back to the year 1692 in Naples, since the warm climate of southern regions like Campania and Sicily was ideal for tomato cultivation, which helped people to adopt them into their kitchen, where they were used in sauces, soups, and stews. By the 19th century, tomatoes were a staple in Italian cooking. So by the year 1882, even though fears and rumors of the plant's potential poison lingered, hundreds of tomato recipes were printed in local periodicals and newspapers, where eventually the world came to appreciate the tomato for what it truly is, a culinary superstar. According to legend, pizza was invented by a pizza maker named Raffaele Esposito in the year 1889, who created the pizza margherita to honor Margherita of Savoy, who was the queen of the newly founded Kingdom of Italy at the time, during her visit to the city of Naples, where Raphael created a pizza representing the colors of the Italian flag using red tomatoes, white mozzarella, and green basil. He named it Pizza Margherita, which Queen Margherita enjoyed so much that she gave her royal approval, which contributed significantly to its popularity. This is a notable example of the cultural embrace of the tomato. Now, the idea of flatbread with toppings dates back to ancient civilizations like the Greeks and the Egyptians, who baked flatbreads with olive oil and spices. So pizza as we know it began to take shape in Naples, where initially it was a food for the poor made from readily available ingredients to create a simple and affordable meal. Eventually, the dish gained popularity, transcending class boundaries, so much so that street vendors and informal restaurants called pizzerias in Naples began selling different types of pizza. And It was only spread globally in the late 19th to 20th century when Italian immigrants brought pizza to the United States and other parts of the world. And American soldiers returning from Italy during World War II helped popularize pizza in the United States, leading to its global spread. Today, pizza is a global phenomenon, with various styles and interpretations existing worldwide. Eventually, canned tomatoes and tomato paste also became widely available, further integrating the fruit into Italian cuisine. Thanks in part to the influence of Italian immigrants who introduced dishes like pizza and pasta sauce to the world. From Italian pasta sauces to Spanish gazpacho to Mexican salsas, the tomato's versatility knows no bounds and has taken the world by storm, becoming an essential ingredient in kitchens everywhere. In fact, did you know that the global tomato market is worth billions of dollars annually? Well, let's explore the economy of tomatoes. Tomatoes are big business. From fresh tomatoes to canned tomato products like sauces and soups, tomatoes are a staple ingredient in kitchens around the world. See, back in 2022, the global market was worth over 165 billion US dollars. Tomatoes, fresh or chilled, represent just 0.049% of total world trade. Today, we live in a world where there are over 10,000 different varieties of tomato, with new ones continually being developed. They vary in size, shape, color, and flavor to include categories like heirloom, hybrid, cherry, grape, beefsteak, plum, also called Roma, greenhouse, and Campari tomatoes, each with its own unique characteristics. The diversity in tomato varieties is due to their adaptability to different climates and growing conditions, as well as selective breeding by farmers and gardeners over centuries, which makes tomatoes a versatile ingredient in cuisines worldwide. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, Asia, led by China and India, is the largest tomato-producing continent with significant contribution to the global tomato production with 119 million metric tons per year, followed by Europe with 24 million metric tons. And in 2021, more than 189 million tons of tomatoes were produced globally. And what about the tomato-flavored beverage market size? Well, back in 2022, it was valued at 11 billion US dollars. Now let's talk about ketchup. Did you know that ketchup's long history dates back to Imperial China and the word originates from the southern Min dialect? If not, you should know that ketchup was developed in China long before the discovery of tomatoes, since the fermented pastes made from fish entrails, meat byproducts, and soybeans was easy to store on long ocean voyages. By the early 1700s, the salty paste spread along trade routes to Indonesia and the Philippines, where it was enjoyed by British traders who took samples home, making the 18th century a golden age for ketchup. In the year 1812, The first recipe for tomato-based ketchup was developed by James Mease, who was a prominent American scientist, horticulturist, and doctor from Philadelphia in the United States, who wrote that the choicest ketchup came from love apples, which was the term used by the French, pommes d'amour. In 2023, the global tomato ketchup market was valued at over $20 billion. In addition to food products, tomatoes are also used in textiles. Yes, there is such a thing called tomato leather, which is a biodegradable textile made from the skins, stems, and leaves of tomato plants. Where is this being used, you may ask? Well, bioleather is a fully biodegradable material made in India by extracting cellulose fiber from tomato plant waste to create tomato composite. In fact, numerous companies in India are now working to create sustainable leather alternatives from a range of plant-based materials that would otherwise be wasted. Tomatoes are also used in the cosmetic and pharmaceutical industries, which makes them a valuable commodity in various industries. Next, let's delve into the politics of tomatoes. Believe it or not, tomatoes have been at the center of political disputes throughout history. In the United States, for example, tariffs on imported tomatoes have sparked tensions between the United States and Mexico, which are two major tomato-producing countries. Additionally, issues like labor rights, environmental regulations, and trade agreements all intersect with the tomato industry, shaping the way tomatoes are grown, harvested, and distributed around the world. Now, let's talk about the language of tomatoes. Tomatoes have inspired a rich vocabulary of culinary terms, from heirloom and vine-ripened to sauce and ketchup. Understanding these terms can enhance your appreciation of tomatoes and the dishes they star in. And tomatoes also have a language of their own when it comes to gardening. Terms like indeterminate and determinate refer to different types of tomato plants and their growth habits. See, indeterminate tomatoes are a type of tomato plant that continues to grow and produce fruit throughout the growing season until they are killed by frost or other environmental factors. Indeterminate tomatoes have a vining growth habit and can grow quite tall, often requiring support such as stakes or trellises. And varieties tend to produce fruit over a longer period, making them popular choices for home gardeners and commercial growers who want a continuous harvest throughout the season. In contrast, determinate tomatoes produce a finite number of fruit and then stop growing. So, whether you're a seasoned chef or an amateur gardener, learning the language of tomatoes opens up a world of possibilities. Bringing us to today, where the tomato is not only the most popular garden vegetable in the United States, but is cultivated in nearly every region with a sufficient growing season on every country around the planet, leading some experts to believe that tomatoes are the single most important horticultural crop on the global scale. Can you believe that? When we just learned that back in the 1500s that some people thought it was a poison. Quite interesting. Well, today the culture of tomatoes have become very diverse and varied, which reflects the fruit's widespread popularity and versatility in cuisines around the world. Did you know that tomatoes are a key ingredient in a wide range of sauces and condiments, including marinara sauce, salsa, ketchup, and barbecue sauce? These sauces are used in dishes such as pasta, pizza, tacos, burgers, and grilled meats. Tomatoes are commonly used to make soups and stews, such as tomato soup, gazpacho, and chili. These dishes are enjoyed in many cultures and are often served as comforting meals during the cold weather. And for those of you who love salads and appetizers, while tomatoes are a staple ingredient in salads and appetizers around the world since they add freshness, flavor, and color to these dishes. And we all know that tomatoes are a popular topping for sandwiches, wraps, and burgers, since sliced tomatoes are often layered with lettuce, cheese, meats, and condiments to create our delicious and satisfying meals. Tomatoes can be preserved through various methods, such as canning, drying, and pickling. Sun-dried tomatoes, canned tomatoes, and pickled tomatoes are used in a variety of dishes and add depth of flavor. Additionally, tomatoes are used to make various beverages, including tomato juice, cocktails, and tomato-based smoothies. Yes, I said smoothies, as these drinks are enjoyed as refreshing beverages or as an accompaniment to meals. Tomatoes are a staple ingredient in many cuisines around the world, including Italian, Mediterranean, Mexican, Indian, Middle Eastern, and Southeast Asian dishes, since tomatoes are used in a wide range of dishes, from pasta to curry to stir-fries. In some cultures, tomatoes are celebrated through festivals and celebrations. For example, Spain's La Tomatina festival involves a massive tomato fight held annually in Buñol, Valencia. See, on the last Wednesday of August since 1945, during the town's festivities, more than 20,000 people gathered together to throw ripe tomatoes at each other for about an hour, which results in the streets being covered with red pulp containing citric acid. The citric acid in the tomatoes leads to a clean town, since the washed surfaces become very clean. Even though it is unclear how this event started, it has become a fun and chaotic event to highlight community spirit and cultural celebration. But what if tomatoes were suddenly no longer a part of our lives? Imagine, some civilizations never even knew about tomatoes. For example, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks and Romans, the East Asians. Mesopotamian civilizations, the medieval Europeans, and Islamic civilizations never even consumed tomatoes because, as mentioned before, tomatoes are native to the Andes region and were only introduced to the rest of the world following the age of exploration in the 15th century. Now, imagine a world without the tangy sweetness of tomato sauce, the refreshing bite from eating a tomato salad, or the comforting warmth of a bowl of tomato soup. It's hard to fathom, isn't it? Imagine a world without all of the popular foods containing tomatoes, such as pasta sauces, pizza, salsa, ketchup, soups like tomato and gazpacho, salads, sandwiches, burgers, curries, stews, various sauces and gravies, and all of the popular beverages using tomato juice. It's a bleak image, isn't it? Tomatoes are not just a fruit. The name comes from the language spoken by the Aztecs and have become a cornerstone of cuisines around the globe. Without them, our culinary landscape would be bland and uninspired. Their absence would also impact our cultural traditions and social gatherings. Without tomatoes or tomatoes, would we lose a connection to the diverse cuisines and cultures that rely on them? Or would we find new ways to innovate and create flavorful dishes with alternative ingredients? These are thought-provoking questions that reminds us of the importance of biodiversity, which refers to the variety of life on Earth, including all living organisms and the ecosystems they inhabit. Biodiversity is essential for healthy ecosystems, which provides benefits like clean air, water, food, and medicine, including supporting human well-being and the environment. These questions also remind us of the importance of culinary diversity in our world, which refers to the variety and richness of foods, dishes, ingredients, cooking techniques, and culinary traditions found within a particular region, culture, or cuisine. It encompasses the wide range of flavors, textures, aromas, and presentations that characterize different culinary practices around the world. Culinary diversity celebrates the unique cultural heritage and culinary creativity of diverse communities and plays a crucial role in shaping cultural identity, social connections, and culinary innovation. Finally, we must appreciate the pomodoro, which is the Italian word for tomato, for inspiring Francesco Cirillo, who, in the late 1980s, developed the time management method some of us may know as the Pomodoro technique. See, while he was a university student, Francesco found that focusing on his work during intervals of 25 minutes while taking short 5-minute breaks significantly increased his productivity. Today, Francesco's Pomodoro technique has reshaped how millions of people around the world approach tasks, emphasizing the importance of focused work and regular breaks. The technique has transcended cultural boundaries and is used by students, professionals, and anyone looking to improve their time management skills. Its simplicity and adaptability have made it a universal tool which can be applied across diverse professions and lifestyles. It challenges the notion that longer hours equal more productivity, highlighting how structured breaks can actually enhance focus and efficiency. This method prompts us to reconsider our approach to work and time management, proving that sometimes less can indeed be more. Thank you to my Russian language speaking listener who reminded me to include this story in my podcast since she recently learned about this technique. Without the tomato, we would not have the colorful and easily recognizable tomato-shaped kitchen timer which inspired Francesco just over 30 years ago to develop the Pomodoro technique. So, what's a tomato's favorite nonfiction book? It's called The Sauce of Life. Let's be honest though, the tomato has influenced the way we live our lives in more ways than we can imagine. So much so that after I completed this episode, I came across an article which highlighted the 2-pizza rule for effective meetings. And I just had to tell you about it since we just learned all about how tomatoes inspired the invention of the pizza. The 2-pizza rule for meetings was developed by Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, which is an American technology multinational company. While it is not documented when the exact date of the 2-pizza rule was developed, it is believed to have emerged during Amazon's formative years in the late 1990s or early 2000s. Since this was when Jeff observed that teams comprised of less people tend to be more productive and efficient than teams that contain more people than needed. He believed that when a team has more people than needed, it leads to inefficiency, decreased communication, and difficulty making decisions. So, to address these issues, Jeff proposed the 2-pizza rule. Yes, pizza, which suggests that a meeting should never have more people than can be fed by 2 pizzas. This rule encourages keeping meetings small and focused to ensure that only essential participants are included to allow for more effective meetings through meaningful discussions and decision-making processes. The 2-pizza rule emphasizes the importance of keeping meetings small and focused to enhance productivity and encourage meaningful participation. It aims to minimize unnecessary attendees and ensure that discussions remain relevant and efficient. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Tomato Chronicles, where we explored the story of humanity's love apple. The journey of the tomato in Italian cuisine is a remarkable example of how a foreign ingredient can become an integral part of a nation's culinary identity. From initial skepticism to becoming synonymous with Italian cooking, the tomato story reflects cultural, agricultural, and gastronomic adaptation and evolution. Thank you for joining me on this flavorful journey through the history, economy, politics, language, fashion, and culture of tomatoes. I hope you've enjoyed our deep dive into the world of tomatoes, or tomatoes. Join us next time as we explore another fascinating story of human culture. Until then, keep learning, laughing, and savoring the sweetness of life.